I never imagined that one day I would leave everything behind and fly across the world because of one person. People saw the smiles on my face. They saw the success. They saw the beautiful cars. They saw the breathtaking views from my home in Dubai. They believed I had everything a man could ever wish for. No one knew that every night I returned to an empty heart. Every morning my schedule was already full. Meetings, business, charity events, long drives through the beautiful streets of Dubai, dinner invitations, luxury hotels, private lounges. Everything looked perfect from the outside. People admired my life. Many wished they could live the life I was living, but none of them knew what happened after I closed the door of my room. The silence became louder than the city outside. I would stand in front of the large glass window, looking at the lights of Dubai, watching thousands of people moving through the city. Everyone seemed happy. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go. I kept asking myself one question: why do I still feel lonely? I had everything except the one person my heart wanted. Sometimes I picked up my phone, opened our old conversation, read every single message again. Every word brought back another memory. Sometimes I smiled. Sometimes I closed my eyes because it hurt too much. I never deleted our conversations. I never deleted our pictures. I never deleted the memories because deep inside my heart, I never stopped believing that one day our story would continue. People often say that time heals everything. I believe those words too. I waited, days passed, weeks passed, months passed, nothing changed. The pain remained, the memories remained, the love remained. I tried to keep myself busy. I traveled more, I worked harder, I attended more events, I smiled for every camera, I greeted everyone with confidence. But every smile disappeared the moment I was alone. One evening I returned home much later than usual. I was completely exhausted. I took off my jacket, placed my phone on the table, walked toward the balcony. The cool evening air touched my face. The city looked more beautiful than ever, yet my heart felt heavier than ever. I asked myself, how can someone have everything and still feel like something is missing? That night I could not sleep. I walked through every room of my home. Everything was quiet, everything was expensive, everything was beautiful. But none of it brought me peace. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat near the window, opened my phone once again. Her name was still there. Our old messages were still there. I slowly started reading from the very beginning. The first hello, the first smile, the first joke, the first late night conversation. Every memory felt alive again. I smiled without realizing it. Then tears filled my eyes. For the first time, I admitted something to myself. I never stopped loving her, not even for a single day. I had spent months pretending to be strong, pretending that I had moved on, pretending that work was enough to fill the emptiness inside me. None of it was true. The truth was simple. My heart still belonged to her. I looked at the clock. It was very late. Most people were asleep, but I was sitting alone with memories that refused to leave me. That was the moment I realized something. If I stayed silent forever, I would regret it forever. If I never told her how I truly felt, I would spend the rest of my life wondering what could have happened. I stood up immediately, opened my laptop, looked at the next available flight to America. For several minutes, I stared at the screen. My heart was beating faster than ever. This was not a business trip. This was not a vacation. This was the biggest decision of my life. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, some journeys are not made by the mind. Some journeys are made by the heart. Without thinking any longer, I booked a flight. The confirmation appeared on the screen. There was no turning back anymore. For the first time in many months, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Hope. I looked out at the beautiful skyline of Dubai one more time. A small smile appeared on my face. Tomorrow, everything was going to change. The next morning, I woke up before the sun had risen. For the first time in many months, I did not feel tired. I looked at the flight confirmation again. It was real. There was no turning back. I quietly packed a small travel bag. I did not need many things. This journey was not about luggage. It was about carrying a heart that had been waiting for too long. As I walked through my home, I looked around one last time. Everything was exactly where I had left it. The luxury furniture, the beautiful paintings, the large windows overlooking Dubai, the expensive watches resting in their boxes, the keys to cars I once dreamed of owning, everything was there. Yet none of those things could stop me from leaving. That morning, I finally understood something. A peaceful heart is more valuable than a luxurious life. My driver was already waiting outside. He smiled as he opened the car door. He asked if I was leaving for another business meeting. I smiled and simply said something much more important. He nodded without asking another question. The drive through Dubai felt different. The city was slowly waking up. The first sunlight touched the tall buildings. People were beginning another ordinary day, but for me, nothing about this day was ordinary. Every street reminded me of memories. Every building reminded me how hard I had worked. Every success suddenly felt much smaller than the decision I had made. When I arrived at the airport, everything moved quickly. People were rushing toward their flights. Families were saying goodbye. Friends were laughing together. Children were running through the terminal. I watched them quietly. For the first time, I noticed something. The happiest people were not carrying the most expensive bags. They were carrying the people they loved. That thought stayed with me. As I walked toward my gate, my phone vibrated. For 1 second, my heart stopped. I quickly looked at the screen. It was not her. I smiled for a moment. Then I quietly placed the phone back into my pocket. I kept asking myself, would she be happy to see me? Would she be surprised? Would she even want to talk to me? Thousands of questions filled my mind, but only one answer mattered. I had to try. If I never tried, I would regret it forever. Soon, my flight was ready to board. I walked through the gate. Every step felt heavier than the one before. Not because I was afraid of flying, because I was flying toward the biggest moment of my life. After finding my seat, I looked out of the window. Dubai looked beautiful from above. The city had given me unforgettable memories. It had given me success. It had given me opportunities. But this journey was about something success could never buy. The airplane slowly moved toward the runway. I closed my eyes. I whispered a small prayer. Please, let this journey end with peace. A few moments later, the aircraft lifted into the sky. As Dubai became smaller beneath the clouds, I placed my hand over my heart. I could feel it beating faster than ever. I smiled quietly. No matter what happened after I landed in America, at least I would know that I had followed my heart. Sometimes the bravest decision is not starting a new life. Sometimes the bravest decision is fighting for the person who already became your life. I looked through the window at the endless clouds. For the first time in a very long time, I believed that hope was stronger than fear. And somewhere on the other side of the ocean, the next chapter of my story was waiting for me. The flight felt longer than any journey I had ever taken, not because of the distance, because my heart refused to stay calm. I kept looking through the window. The endless clouds reminded me how small the world really is. Sometimes we believe someone is too far away, but the truth is, the longest distance is the silence between two hearts. The flight attendants smiled as they walked past. They asked if I needed anything. I politely thanked them, but nothing they could offer was what I truly wanted. The only thing I wanted was one chance to look into her eyes again. Hours passed. I could not sleep. I could not watch a movie. I could not read a book. Every thought returned to her. I remembered the first time we spoke. I remembered the first time she made me laugh. I remembered the first time she believed in me when I doubted myself. Those memories never left me. They had simply been waiting for me to find the courage to face them. As the aircraft crossed the ocean, I quietly looked at the photograph saved on my phone. It was my favorite picture. Every time I looked at it, my heart became peaceful. I smiled without realizing it. Then I whispered, "I hope you are happy. I hope life has been kind to you. I hope I am not too late." Several hours later, the captain announced that we would soon begin our descent. My heart started beating faster. America was finally beneath the clouds. I looked out of the window. The lights stretched as far as my eyes could see. Everything felt new. Everything felt unfamiliar. Yet somehow my heart felt closer to home. When the plane landed, everyone quickly stood up. People hurried to collect their bags. I remained seated for a few extra moments. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and thanked God for bringing me safely across the world. After leaving the airport, the cool evening air touched my face. I looked around quietly. This city was completely different from Dubai. Different roads, different buildings, different voices, different faces. But I had not traveled this far to admire the city. I had come for one person. I entered the waiting car. As it drove through the streets, my eyes stayed fixed on the passing lights. I kept asking myself the same question. What if she has forgotten me? What if she no longer wants to see me? What if I came too late? For a moment, fear filled my heart. Then I remembered why I had come. Love is not about knowing the answer. Love is having the courage to ask the question. The car finally stopped outside a quiet neighborhood. I slowly stepped out. My heart was beating louder than ever before. I looked toward the house I had imagined 1,000 times. A warm light was shining through one of the windows. I stood there in complete silence. After crossing thousands of miles, after carrying months of regret, after countless sleepless nights, only a few steps remained between me and the person I had never stopped loving. I looked at the front door, took one slow breath, walked forward, raised my hand, and just before knocking, I quietly whispered, "Please let this be the beginning of a beautiful ending." She opened the door. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Months of silence stood between us. She looked into my eyes. I looked into hers. Nothing had changed. Only the pain had grown older. I quietly said, "I know I am late, but my heart never stopped looking for you." A tear rolled down her cheek. She stepped aside. Without saying a word, she invited me inside. That silent invitation gave me more hope than 1,000 promises. We sat across from each other. 2 cups of coffee rested on the table. Neither of us touched them. She finally asked, "Why did you come?" I smiled sadly. because every road I traveled still led me back to you. She lowered her eyes. I could see she was holding back her emotions. I told her everything. How success never filled the emptiness. How every celebration ended in silence. How every night I read our old conversations. I admitted every mistake. I never blamed her. I only blamed myself. She listened quietly. Then she softly asked, "If I had never forgiven you, would you still have come?" I answered without thinking, "Yes," because asking for forgiveness was more important than living with regret. For the first time, she smiled. It was the same smile I had crossed an ocean to see. The following morning, we walked through a quiet park. No cameras, no meetings, no luxury. Just two hearts learning how to trust again. She laughed at something small. I realized how much I had missed that sound. She looked at me and said, "You look different." I smiled. Love teaches lessons that success never can. She nodded. For the first time, our conversation felt easy again. It no longer felt like goodbye. It finally felt like a new beginning. That evening, we watched the sunset together. The sky slowly turned golden. She looked at the horizon. Then she quietly said, "I prayed many times that one day you would come back." I looked at her with surprise. "You never stopped believing." She smiled. "Real love does not disappear. Sometimes it simply waits." I reached for her hand. This time, she did not pull away. That one moment healed months of silence. The next morning, I knew it was time to return to Dubai. Leaving felt difficult, but my heart was finally peaceful. At the airport, she looked at me and smiled. "Promise me one thing." I asked. "Anything," she answered. "Never let silence separate us again." I held her hand and said, "I promise. No matter where life takes us, you will never have to wonder how I feel again." As the plane lifted into the sky, I looked down at America one last time. I arrived carrying regret. I returned carrying hope. Sometimes people think the longest journey is crossing an ocean. They are wrong. The longest journey is finding the courage to return to the person your heart never truly left. When I returned to Dubai, everything looked familiar. The same skyline, the same roads, the same home, but this time my heart was different. The emptiness was gone. Every morning now began with her message. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" I smiled every single time. No meeting became too difficult. No day felt too long. Because I knew someone was waiting to hear my voice. Every evening we spoke on video call, sometimes for an hour, sometimes until midnight. Distance no longer felt like a problem. Love had already brought our hearts together. One evening she looked at me and smiled. She said, "You laugh more than before." I laughed and answered, "Because you brought my smile back." She softly said, "I was afraid you would forget me." I shook my head. "Some people become memories. You became my home." She covered her face because she was smiling. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Sometimes silence says more than words. That night, I slept with the biggest smile on my face. Days turned into weeks. Our trust became stronger. We shared everything. The happiest moments, the hardest moments, the smallest details of our day. She became the first person I wanted to call after every meeting. She celebrated every success with me, and whenever I felt tired, she reminded me to slow down. She never tried to change who I was. She simply made me a better person. That was the kind of love I had always prayed for. One night before ending our video call, She looked into my eyes and asked, if you had one chance to relive your life, what would you change? I smiled without thinking. I would come to America much sooner. I would never let silence grow between us. She smiled with tears in her eyes. Then she whispered, everything happens at the right time. Maybe we needed that distance to understand our hearts. I smiled and nodded. She was right. Some journeys are not meant to change the world. They are meant to change one heart. And mine had changed forever. Life slowly found its rhythm again. Every morning began with her smile. Every evening ended with her voice. The distance between Dubai and America was still there, but the distance between our hearts had disappeared. She became the first person I wanted to tell everything. After every meeting, I called her. After every success, I looked for her smile. One evening, she asked, what makes you happiest now? I smiled and answered, knowing that I no longer have to imagine you. I can see you every single day. She laughed softly. Then she said, do you know what I pray for every night? I asked, what? She smiled, that one day we will never have to end another video call. For a moment, I stayed silent. Then I answered, that day is closer than you think. Her eyes filled with happiness. She smiled in a way I had never seen before. That smile reminded me why I had crossed an ocean. Sometimes one decision changes an entire lifetime. Flying to America had become the greatest decision I had ever made. The following weeks were filled with happiness. We never allowed silence to return between us. No matter how busy life became, we always found time for each other. One evening, while watching the sunset together on a video call, she looked at me and asked, if you could describe our story in one sentence, what would you say? I smiled without thinking. The longest journey of my life ended the day I found my way back to your heart. She placed her hand over her heart. Then she quietly whispered, I will never forget the day you knocked on my door. I smiled and replied, and I will never forget the moment you opened it. She laughed through happy tears. For a few moments, we simply looked at each other. No words were needed. Some moments become memories forever. Before ending the call, she softly said, thank you for choosing love instead of pride. I smiled and answered, thank you for giving my heart a second chance. When the call ended, I walked toward the window. The lights of Dubai looked more beautiful than ever. Not because the city had changed, because my heart had finally found peace. I quietly smiled. Sometimes people ask why I suddenly flew to America. They never realized that I was not searching for another country. I was searching for the person who had always felt like home. The days continued to pass, but one thing never changed. She was still the first person I wanted to talk to every morning, and the last person I wanted to hear before I slept. One evening, she called me earlier than usual. The moment I answered, I noticed the smile on her face. It was brighter than ever. I smiled and asked, what happened? She softly replied, I was thinking about the day you suddenly came to America. I laughed. That journey still feels unreal. She nodded. Then she quietly said, if you had not come, we might have become two people who loved each other only through memories. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. I looked into her eyes and answered, that is exactly why I came. I could never allow our story to end with silence. She smiled with the tears of happiness. Then she whispered, thank you for believing in us. I gently replied, love is not proven by words. Love is proven by the distance you are willing to cross for one heart. She smiled. That sentence stayed in our hearts. From that day, we stopped counting the miles between us. We only counted the memories we were creating together. Every morning brought another reason to smile. Every evening brought another beautiful conversation. Every goodbye became easier because we already knew another hello was waiting for us. One night, she asked me one final question. If someone asked you why you suddenly flew to America, what would your answer be? I looked at her for a few seconds. Then I smiled. I did not fly to America because I was lonely. I did not fly because I had nothing. I flew because I finally understood that success means nothing if the person you love is missing from your life. Luxury gave me comfort, but love gave me peace. Success gave me recognition, but your smile gave me happiness. That is why I crossed an ocean not to change my life, but to protect the love that had already changed it. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there were tears of joy. She smiled and said, "That is the most beautiful answer you have ever given me." I smiled back. The lights of Dubai were shining outside my window.